可以啦。
使唔使識嘅識
哦，
係咪？
嚇，
使唔使識嘅識嘅？你我
但係我
插上手指條嘅。
哦，OK。好，睇翻呢度。Okay, we're ready to start the talk. I'm Pierre Wong. I'm a conference interpreter. Oh, you're ready. And you got to introduce me first.
Shall we wait for one more minute?
Okay. So while we're waiting, I'll show you some of my slides, some of my pictures. So these are some of, I started taking pictures of my work from 2005, so the pictures only go back to 2005, but I actually started, I've been working as an interpreter since 1996. So these are the oldest, they only go back to 2005.
Okay.
Okay.
Very brief introduction of Pierre. And we are very honored to have invited Pierre to share with us his experience in conference interpreting. And some of you who did the word shadowing with Pierre should know him very well, probably better than I do. Okay, and Pierre received his education in Waterloo University in Canada, and he joined the judiciary of the Hong Kong government as a court interpreter in 1996. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, right. And 2 years later, he joined the simultaneous interpreter section of the Legislative Council as a simultaneous interpreter, and before he finally joined the private sector in 1999 as a conference interpreter. And apart from practicing interpreting, Pierre has also taught interpreting in a number of tertiary institutions, including the Open University, Chinese University, Polytechnic University, and the City University of Hong Kong. And I'm sure Pierre has a lot of experience to share with us today, and he'll be happy to take your questions later towards the end of the talk. And you're very welcome to put your question to him in any of the working languages, which are Cantonese, English, and Putonghua. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your introduction, Eva. So today, the plan for today, for this afternoon, is I'll spend about 20-30 minutes of giving you some brief introduction to my work, and for the remainder of the time, I'll take questions and answers. And these are some of the this is a picture of Hong Kong U, WHO trips, IP protection, and as you can see from my pictures, let me see, get some going here. The work I do in Hong Kong, half of it is for the local government, for Legislative Council, and the other half of my work is for the private sector. And in the private sector, we get results announcements, which is commercial stuff. And sometimes we also have academic exchanges in the private sector. And actually it's quite varied. We can have a whole spectrum of different subjects where they need interpreters. For example, we have in this university, they used to have an executive MBA program where one of the guest speakers was a TV analyst for Phoenix TV, Professor Zi Qiping. And so a lot of my work would also take me around nearby vicinity. Sometimes I go to Macau, sometimes I go to Shenzhen, Guangzhou. So work also involves a little bit of traveling. This summer I'll be working in Korea, in Seoul, for the 12th International Association of Prosecutors. The 11th session, if I remember correctly, it was either the 10th or 11th session was held in Hong Kong 2 years ago in 08, 09. And I had worked for that as well. And this year they'll be holding it in Seoul, so I'll be going to Seoul during the summer. And sometimes we have major events in Hong Kong. This one is the ITU, International Telecommunications Union. 国际电信联盟. So there are actually a lot of major events in Hong Kong that also require interpreting services. So you can see from the pictures, show you 07. I think, this one's not moving. And this is a picture from Macau. It's an environmental protection thing, and it's been going for 3-4 years now. We have the annual SME conference. This is held every year in Hong Kong as well. So that's a brief introduction to my work. Let me refer my notes now. Okay, as I said, I'll be dividing my talk into 2 parts. We'll have the talk itself for 20-30 minutes, and I'll show you what I want to talk about. Okay. We went through the slideshows. Then I want to talk about the mental aspects of psychological aspects of interpreting, what's going on in an interpreter's mind. We'll have a little bit of an interactive demonstration regarding memory, interpreter's memory, how we use our memory. And we'll talk a little bit about how to build a vocabulary, and then we'll have creativity and interpretation. Use your nose. You didn't read it wrong, it's correct. I'll be talking about how we use our nose. And then lastly, we'll do Q&A. So when Eva invited me to do this talk, I thought it was going to be really easy. Walk in the park, piece of cake, just show you some pictures, share some of my experience with you, and maybe take a few questions, and I left it at that. But then last Saturday, I had to do a concluding interview with some of the students here in the work exposure program. And unfortunately, I disclosed a lot of my talk material. So I had to do a last-minute 11th hour job of finding new examples, finding new material. And then I had to revisit my notes. And then I realized that what I'm presenting here is actually an argument. And over the years as an interpreter, a lot of people ask me a similar question, a recurrent question, a question that different people, they keep asking the same thing. A lot of people will say, I'm bilingual, is that enough to be an interpreter? Can I be an interpreter because I'm bilingual? And my answer is, it's not as simple as it seems, and this is going to be my argument. And when we get to the end, I'll share with you my conclusion. So, coming to the point of mental aspects of interpreting, or the psychological state of an interpreter when he's working, what's going on in his mind? Well, for me, I feel it's a very passive exercise what we're doing interpreting. We don't have an agenda to promote. We don't have any ideas to share. We're only passively repeating in a different language what the speaker is saying. So it's very passive. So to me, it feels like for example, in a soccer game, I'm already 2 goals down. So I need to catch up, I need to neutralize, I need to stay in the game. And the only way for me to stay in the game is to catch up. I have to score 2 goals because I'm already down 2 goals. Or it's like, let's say I have a mortgage. I'm already millions of dollars in debt. And every month I need to pay back a mortgage. So that's the kind of pressure we're facing. And the analogy I like the best is in a tennis game, for example, where I don't get to serve. I'm always returning the service. So, and your opponent, you have no idea if he's going to hit your forehand, your backhand, or if he's going to have spin on the ball. All I know is I have to be ready for whatever is served at me, and that's the pressure that we're facing. The reason why I brought this up is, well, let me digress a little bit, is because during the course of my preparation of this talk, I had to surf the internet and I found a video of a professor in southern China, someplace in southern China, and he was asking his class, what does it take to be interpreted? And he was going through the classroom, asking his students one by one. And after watching 5 minutes, he couldn't come up with an answer, and I got fed up with it. I said, tell me, what do you require from an interpreter? And I was waiting there for 5 minutes for him to disclose what are the qualities of an interpreter, and just couldn't get anything from that video. So that's why if he's not going to tell me, I'm going to tell you. And I already told you, you're 2 goals down. You have to catch up. If you want to stay in the game, you got to neutralize. Otherwise, you're going to be out of the game. So moving on to another aspect, another question that a lot of people ask is, as an interpreter, what kind of skills do you need? What kind of abilities do you have? And some people might think that interpreters have a really powerful memory or strong memory or photographic memory. Is that really the case? Well, let's show you some research done in the 1930s, 1940s. So back wrong diagram. So back in the 1930s, 1940s, there was a Dutch psychologist called Adrian de Groot, and he did some studies involving chess grandmasters and chess amateurs. So what did he do? He would show the grandmasters and the beginners, the amateurs, a typical chess diagram, and he would flash it on the screen, let's say 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and then he would require the subjects of the experiment to reconstruct the diagram from memory. So the subjects were given a chessboard, the chess pieces, and they would have to reconstruct the diagram from memory. And to nobody's surprise, the grandmasters did a better job than the amateurs. I mean, everybody would expect that, right? The experts would do a better job, they would be more accurate, they would require less time. Let's say you flash it for 10 seconds and the grandmaster would be able to reconstruct it, but you know, the beginner might need 30 seconds or a minute, and even so, he wouldn't be as accurate as the grandmaster. So those were the initial findings from the 30s and 40s. And 30, 40 years later, in the 1970s and the early 70s, a team of US psychologists, Chase and Simon from Carnegie Mellon University, they built on de Groot's ideas of his experiments of memory. And what they did was slightly different. They would show a typical position, the one just now. This is, the diagram in the upper left corner is a typical position. It's legal, it can happen, it can occur. But this position is random and it cannot occur legally. What I mean is, in a normal chess game, you cannot have this kind of position. It's just not possible. But if you count the number of pieces, the number of pieces in the larger diagram and the smaller diagram are the same. Now let's count them. There's 4 here, 2 here, 6, 7, and another 4, that's 11. And this is a 3/4 square minus 1, so they have the same number of pieces. They have the same number of pieces, but one is a random position, one is a legal position. So what did Chase and Simon from Carnegie Mellon, what did they find out in their experiment? They found out if you give a legal position to the grandmasters and the beginners, the grandmasters do as well as the beginners. But if you give a random position, grandmasters and beginners, they have no difference in memory capacity. They're just as bad or just as good. So that was a surprising finding back in the 70s, is that experts and beginners, no matter what field it is, it could be chess, it could be music, anything you want, they don't have any inherent differences in memory capacity. It's only in specialized areas where the expert demonstrates much greater memory ability. So that was a very surprising finding coming from the 1970s. And their ideas that they developed from this chess memory recollection is the idea of chunking. So apparently experts, when they are in their technical field, the way they remember things is in chunks. And at this point, if you're willing, we'd like to do a demonstration. Anybody interested in an interactive demonstration here on memory chunking? Anybody? Tony, you want to do another? Anybody else interested in a chunking experiment, in a memory experiment? No? Oh, okay, let me draw up the numbers and figures first, and then we can, depending on whether you're interested, we can do the experiment. Jody? 이거 좀 나, 이거. OK， OK， 咁我寫啲數字喺度先。So Tony did a series of numbers on the last occasion. This time I'm going to change it. We're going to do something else. We're going to do letters. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. So, would anybody want to volunteer and see? I'll time you if you, and we'll see if you can memorize the sequence. Anybody interested in doing that? Any volunteers? Okay, I'll give you another sequence. Okay, anybody want to volunteer? I'll give you 30 seconds. Is that enough? Are we working on it? I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay, time's up, 30 seconds. So this is what the psychologist, Adrian de Groot, that's what he did, but he did it with chess pieces. Okay, so with this alphanumeric sequence, how would I remember that? Well, it's very contrived, I admit, but it works as a demonstration. So what is it? Okay, so we have number 1, 长江实业，5号是 HSBC. 13 is, okay, 13 is Hutchison. 13 is Hutchison. 66 is MTRC. Did I leave out Hong Kong Exchange? Hong Kong Exchange is 388. Okay, and then 700 is 10 cent QQ. 941 is China Mobile. And then the rest, one is my Hong Kong mobile number, and the other is my China mobile number. So what Chase and Simon did is they put forward the theory of chunking. So instead of memorizing 20, 30 digits here, you just memorize different chunks. Number 1 chunk, 长江5号汇丰13号和华66港铁388交易所700腾讯94要中国电信中国移动，然后我的2个手机号码。So that is only 9 pieces of information. And for the other sequence, that's okay. Here we go. Find Google. So this sequence is actually the first 9 moves of this opening called the Rai-Lopez Norwegian Defense, E4, E5, E4, E5. Whoop, I'll have to pull this down. White E4, black E5. Okay, I mean, I'll label it for you. That's A, B, C, all the way to H, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the first move of white is E4, and black responds with E5, and then it's knight F3, and so on. Knight C6, bishop B5, A6, bishop retreats to A4, B5, bishop B3, knight to A5, bishop takes F7 check, king takes F7. So that's a better way of remembering the sequence, right? If you know the moves. Here. So this is the sequence. And you can see it's up here. This is the sequence. So this is chunking at work. Instead of memorizing the individual letters, the individual numbers, you remember a chunk of information. And I showed you just now the different chunks. White pawn moves E4, E5, black E5, and so on. And then this is my stock code portfolio, plus my mobile number. So this is how chunking works in theory. And that's what an interpreter does in theory as well. So if you're doing CI, you're remembering a story. And you're remembering the different characters in the story, the different interactions that occur during the story. So when you're taking notes, it's prompting you along the different points in the story. So that's what you do when you're doing CI. And with SI, it's a different skill, but we'll, depending on whether we have enough time, we can move on to that later. So we talked about memory, the mental aspect, the mental state of the interpreter. Now we're going to move on to creative interpreting, using your nose. What do I mean by that? Isn't that strange, using your nose? Let's see. Using your nose. Okay, we had in our work exposure program, we had a little talk about when you're interpreting, do you have to invent the wheel all the time? Aren't there any occasions where there are already Chinese English equivalents, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean. See, I can get Google now. Okay, let's say we start with the English phrase or idiom, don't wash dirty linen in public. Everybody heard of that? You don't want to wash your dirty linen in public? Any response? Wash dirty linen in public? Okay, great minds think alike. You've heard of that? So if you were to interpret great minds think alike, what's the first thing that you would think of in Chinese? 英雄所见略同. Don't wash dirty linen in public. What do you think that means in English? 我听到什么家丑什么？家丑不外传. So this is what I mean. It's like there are some certain equivalents between Chinese and English, so you don't have to invent the wheel all the time. The example that I used in the work exposure program was 隔山買牛, 隔山買牛, and 路出馬腳. Can you think of any English equivalents or English phrases that convey that sort of meaning? Well, okay, the English pig in a poke and cat out of the bag, they actually refer to it, they come from the same background, same story. In the old days, unscrupulous traders, when meat was scarce, and in those days, customers weren't as alert. So what they would pretend to sell a suckling pig, a piglet, and they would put it in a bag and then sell it to the customer. But when the customer went home and opened the bag, it turned out to be a cat. So they did a switch. So that's where we got the English phrase, let the cat out of the bag. The customer got fooled. And when you buy a pig in a poke, that's the same story. The customer thinks he's buying a pig, but in fact when he gets home it turns out to be a cat. So from these events, we got the English sayings and idioms, pig in a poke, cat out of the bag, and in Chinese it would be equivalent to 隔山买牛 and 露出马脚, more or less, right? Okay, another example I'd like to share with you is, let's see. I once did an interpreting assignment, and my partner was a mainland interpreter. And the speaker was talking about, well, the speaker said something, and what he interpreted as 数据调查员. So would you be able to guess what the English speaker said? The interpreter said 数据调查员, 收归调查员. What do you think the original was?